Hello, this is Dan Ferrisi, Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald, welcoming you to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. This is a very special episode. We're excited with our guest here, a real expert on how best to approach technology integration, how to enmesh yourself with an organization, a real thought leader who's become increasingly recognized over the last few years. It's all coming your way today on AV Plus. This podcast is sponsored by Snap One. Snap One introduces a new range of routers, switches, and access points from Arachnus Networks. Designed for high bandwidth systems, our X2O series multi-gig routers and switches efficiently handle intensive network installations. Benefit from our Wi-Fi 6 access points that ensure a robust and consistent signal for your customers. Enhance your networking installations with Oversee, Snap One's free, cloud-based remote management platform. It empowers integrators to seamlessly configure, manage, and troubleshoot devices. Arachnus switches are Oversee compatible, while Arachnus routers come integrated with Oversee Pro, offering additional remote management features. For more details, visit the link in the show notes on our YouTube page. Really excited to be joined today by Frederick Loucks, who is consultant to manufacturers, integrators, and end user organizations in the AV industry. Frederick, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, Dan. Excited to start.
As I say, you are increasingly becoming pretty well known in our industry as a thought leader. I see you at all the shows and often being interviewed and opining on the issues of the day. So before I get into kind of what you're a thought leader on about being an outcome guarantor, et cetera, do you want to just talk a little bit about your background, about your grounding in the industry, and kind of why you're getting so much attention? Because you have an impressive resume.
Thank you. That's kind. I would say, my roots go back in AV, much like many people's do, all the way back to music. And the earliest days for me were like when I was like 12 and 13, running sound for my dad and my family, who are all musicians. I couldn't put two notes together on an instrument, but I could manage an AV system. So learning front of house as a teenager and helping to support the family in that way. And then I ended up moving towards theater, and that's what I ended up studying in college. And I think the thing that stuck with me is while I did a lot on stage, I started doing a lot off stage, in particular in sound design and in show control automation. And the thing with theater, the lesson I think it does such a good job teaching you is that nobody cares about the tech. Nobody cares about the tech in a show. It's not the point. Spectacle's great. Spectacle helps. But if the tech is distracting or in some way upstaging the performance itself, you're doing a bad job. So the best technology is the technology that's invisible, right? The technology you never notice because you're just so absorbed in the story. All we're doing is helping to support that's what that story. So it's very similar to live music, same thing, right? Theater is where I learned it, but it's the same with live music. And I learned that it's really the same with all commercial AV. It's the same with all AV in general, and really broader to technology. So the idea that technology is there for a reason, not for its own sake. And as long as it's performing that purpose, it brings value. And if it's not performing that purpose, it doesn't. And it's really just that simple. So that's where I started in the industry. And I carried that through. I got tired of working production hours. Anybody who's ever worked live events knows it's challenging. And so I decided to move over to commercial. I became a design engineer, started building conference rooms, managing an engineering team, and then had the opportunity to jump into the enterprise space as an end user. So I spent several years working in a couple of very large Fortune 100 organizations, managing thousands of meeting spaces and working on incredible teams that spanned the globe, and learning just how difficult it is to manage AV at scale. And I don't just mean manage the tech, I mean manage the processes too. The entire process, the entire service of delivering AV within an organization and keeping it secure and managed is extremely challenging once you scale up. And so I set out to try and solve that problem. And I don't know that I've been successful, but I've certainly learned a lot. And so this has been my point, is to try and share that knowledge with people. I think I get the attention that I get mostly because I'm noisy and I refuse to be quiet about it, because the industry really needs to grow here. There's a tremendous opportunity for it, and somebody has to, be banging this drum. So I decided, well, it's, might as well be me.
Well, you've done a very good job being an expositor and exponent of a new way of approaching this industry, a much more effective way of doing it. And I want to talk a little bit about the idea of outcome assurance, or being an outcome guarantor. When you think about channel partners, perhaps in the old days, you would think about that much derided term, hang and bang. You go in, you set up the system, then you're out the door. But that's not what people want these days. I know that's certainly not what you stand for. You believe in that outcome assurance, outcome guarantee approach. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's different from being a traditional contractor, a traditional installer, being an outcome guarantor?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it goes back to what I just said, right? If the technology is not fulfilling the business value that it was intended for, then what value does it really bring? And so it's not enough to just deliver a technology stack, right? It's not enough to just hang and bang, right? Like you said, some technology in and walk away, because so often the goals we're trying to achieve aren't that cut and dry. Right. So AV tends to be complicated. Why? Because we are the front line in dealing with human beings in technology. We are the middleware that sits between every incredible piece of cloud technology and human beings. We can't help it, right? We're the ones responsible for transduction, right? For turning acoustic energy and light energy into electrical energy and the reverse. And so we always exist in this plane of existence. And for me, what I sort of started realizing is it's easy to design something in a vacuum, deliver it, put it in, walk away and go work on the next one. And that's how the economics around commercial systems integration tend to work. The problem is when you're trying to deliver a technology solution, it becomes really challenging to do that if you're not really bringing value. And when I say value, I mean to the human beings who are buying that stuff from you. Right? So people buy from people at the end of the day is really what it comes down to. And people need to feel value for what they purchase. It's the same for everything that we buy as human beings. So it's easy to respond to an RFP and to pick the gear off the list and deliver it. But at the end of the day, what creates a sticky relationship with your customers, what makes them come back again and again and again and again, it isn't your price. It's not your price. It's not, it's not your price in a vacuum, at least I should say. It should never be price alone. It should never be just speed alone. It should be the fact that you actually solved their pain and you were there from them if that pain reemerged. So for me, this is just modern selling, right? You don't get to be paid if you're not creating value. It's really just that simple.
I think that is what it boils down to. And I want to talk about the idea of creating value in the context of being proactive versus being reactive.
Yeah.
I think there was a time, maybe 10 years ago, even maybe fewer than that, where it was sufficient to say, call me if you have a problem and I'll roll a truck in 24 hours or 48 hours or 12 hours and I will resolve it. But we're talking a lot more these days about being proactive. I mean, the idea even of potentially resolving a problem before the client knows a problem existed in the first place. Do you want to talk about that dichotomy between proactivity versus reactivity and why we need to be more focused on being proactive these days?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a challenge because while we really like to say that we're going to be proactive in our resolution of issues, there's a lot of supporting technology that doesn't exist to allow us to be proactive. And so there's a real dichotomy here, like you said. What I find is most important is just being authentic about what it is that you're actually doing. Because if you're not being proactive, don't sell being proactive. Like, it's okay. It's okay. Because you're not expected to, I don't think, in this industry still to this point. Our customers might say it, but not a lot of them are lining up for big long-term managed services agreements and things like that still. It's still a niche area to have truly proactive audiovisual system deployment, management, service, et cetera. I will say there's a consumer behavior that's changed, And that may be the key driver of, what will hopefully drive an uptake in proactivity in the AV space, which is we expect things to work as consumers, right? We expect them to come with uptime guarantees. We expect them to function all the time. That's the highly available world we live in. You wouldn't pay, Microsoft or, Gmail for Pro or whatever it might be, X dollars a month if your email only worked a third of the time. And you certainly wouldn't expect to have to tell them your email's not working. You'd expect that they would know that they have a server cluster down or a data center here or whatever it is. That type of service delivery in the modern SaaS age influences consumer behavior, and it sets expectations, especially in B2B, which is where we operate most of the time. So in the B2B space, IT teams want to buy things with guarantees, and AV is not ready to deliver on that. They're just not. We are just not as an industry. We can't guarantee uptime of systems. A lot of that comes down to underlying technology issues, but it also comes down to, I think, maturity in the industry. And I love this industry. I've been here, over a decade and longer as a kid, but there's a reality here, which is we're still very much a deliver and break fix industry. It's product attached services. And the warning I would say for the industry is, I went to a conference with a colleague of mine for an organization called TSIA, which is a wonderful organization. It's a for-profit research organization that operates in the technology services space. It's the Technology and Services Industry Association. And we were there with the big guys, right? Like big tech giants. And we're in this big ballroom and we're listening to the keynote. And they said, the last 10 years we've spent transitioning our product service, our product sales, and our product attached services into managed services and as a service. The last 10 years. They were talking about what the next 10 years were going to look like, right? In digital customer experiences and things like that. We haven't even accomplished what they've done in the last 10 years. So there's a real challenge here. We have to evolve our business models, our way of operating. All of those things have to come before we can start doing managed services, which is really the line between reactive and proactive in my mind. You can offer a reactive support service all day. Most of us don't do a good job of that. Unfortunately, we think we do, but we're not getting constant remote access. We don't have any immediate data that we can go check if we do get a call or we see an alert or whatever it might be. Transitioning that to proactive on the managed services side, that requires a whole other level of sophistication, embedding within an organization. So it's the holy grail. It's where we want to be. It's where the MSPs are. It's where the cloud providers are. We understand that's the direction, but it's going to take some real champions and some real opinionated buyers in the industry to drive the commercial behavior towards that direction.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. And I have to say the anecdote you just shared is pretty bracing. The idea that, people could be saying, well, that was the last 10 years we've been working on that. We're done with that. We're on to the next vision. But we collectively as an industry still have so much catching up to do because we're not to that point yet. It's a bracing a bit of information, but hopefully it gives us a vision and some additional inspiration to get where we need to be. I want to talk briefly about remote monitoring and management, because that is something we're seeing quite a bit more of, even if we're not fully proactive in the way that we talked about, the idea that it still is kind of a break-fix world. I am hearing much, much more about, and we're seeing a lot of technology leaders getting into remote monitoring and management. What are your feelings about that right now?
Yeah, well, it's something I've spent a lot of time on, and most of it just messing up. So I've got some good experience I can share. Monitoring is never done for its own sake, right? So there's a business purpose, like we've been talking about this whole time. There's a business purpose to monitoring, and you have to understand what that business purpose is for the target customer before you even talk about monitoring or get into trying to offer it. So, for example, for an integrator, monitoring has a completely different set of business needs than it does for an end user organization. They're not the same, especially for a big end user organization, because smaller, they're not monitoring their own stuff in a smaller company, but in a bigger, large enterprise organization, big university, multi-campus, right? They've got IT teams, they got AV professionals. They need to be monitoring their own stuff. Down market, that's where integrators can do, better, but their outcomes are different. So let's peel into those just a little bit. On the end user side, right? This is what we would typically think of as like, we really need monitoring, which means One, asset management, which largely doesn't exist in AV outside of spreadsheets and proprietary siloed point tools, right? The various cloud platforms. So asset management is huge. Not just what devices do I have, but what system do they belong to? When were they implemented? When do their warranties expire? When does the system's warranty expire? Where are the photos? Where are the drawings? Where's the control system programming? Where's the configuration guides? Like all of this stuff goes into the asset management promise of a system, right? And a lot of times I hear people say device monitoring, right? We're talking about device monitoring. No, we're not. We should not be talking about device monitoring because we don't sell devices. I realize manufacturers might. Integrators, last mile, do not sell devices. We sell systems. If we're selling devices, we're not monitoring anything. The customer is not going to be deploying devices. They're going to be deploying systems. That's how they think of the world. So we need a completely different mindset on this. System asset management and system monitoring is the need within the large organization. How many rooms do I have? Where are they? What's in them? And are they working? After that, we get to start asking questions about are they being used? To what degree are they being used? Right? We start getting into the business analytics that C-suite really cares about, right? And workplace transformation really cares about, right? Real estate really cares about. But those are all really important data, business outcomes. But they have to have the fundamental data that is asset management, and then start streaming live data from those endpoints called monitoring. It's really just live telemetry. Some of it's asset related. Then you have to start building triggers around that, right? So, okay, well, what does a bad thing mean for this system? What constitutes not healthy? Because a device being offline doesn't necessarily mean the system's not working. Think of a wireless microphone, right? Okay, a wireless mic went down. There's still 4 others in the room. It's fine. So it's much more complex in the enterprise and end user space. It's very different on the integrator side. Fundamentally, when it comes down to integrators, the only thing an integrator really should be cared about when they're offering a support service is how profitable their support service is. It's just the facts. How do you make a profitable support service? You keep the systems working, certainly. More importantly, you don't roll trucks. It's really, that's it. It's a fundamental. Okay, I'll stop saying it's really just that simple. But at the end of the day, when it comes to what integrators should be most concerned about, they should be most concerned about reducing the costs associated with operating a great support service. And that's not really about monitoring at all. That's about remote access.
Yeah.
That's about remote support. How do I enable my support team to resolve issues faster and more effectively remotely? And how do we not compromise security and what the customer needs out of us in the process of doing so? So monitoring is an expansive topic. There's a lot of opinions on it. Obviously, I have my own here. But for me, I've started to see there's a really steep differentiation between what the big companies need that have their IT teams and what integrators should be focused on. And while there's great tools in the integrator space to do this sort of thing, the end user space is still emerging. Let's say it's kind of a nascent market. So I'm excited to continue to be pushing that, allying with companies that are doing great work there and pushing that whole vision forward because we desperately need it in that scaled out environment.
As you said, it's not merely about devices. It is about systems. It is about outcomes. And you made the point that you really need to understand exactly what the pain points are, what the needs are for the enterprise you're working with, the organization you're working with, so you can tend to those needs. I guess the question I have now relates to the tech stacks themselves and actually just the footprint of the organization. Am I right that there are a lot of organizations that don't really have perfect visibility into what their needs are because they don't have really that great visibility into what their tech stacks are, what their footprints are? Can you audit how many conference rooms you have, and then you have 562 on Monday, you re-audit, and then it's 566 on Friday? How are you going to be able to say what your needs are if you don't have full visibility into your tech stack as well as your overall footprint? Is that a big challenge?
That's absolutely a challenge. That's why I mentioned the asset management piece previously. This is a fundamental issue. I talk to enterprises all the time. I've got lots of really great friends and colleagues and peers who manage massive scaled out environments in the AV space. And generally, if I ask them, how many rooms do you have? They don't give me, 3,265 within a margin of error of 4 rooms, right? I get 2,000, 3,000, somewhere in there. That's a big margin of error. And the issue is, while there's lots of device management platforms and lots of device asset management, there's very little that thinks of the world in the way of systems. And so coming back to that concept, right? So listen, I think the outcome there, how you sort of make it work regardless of not having perfect data, is there's some compromises you have to make. And as an end user organization, a big enterprise or university, one of the biggest compromises you have to make is you're going to have to make assumptions about what your users need, and they're going to be informed assumptions, and they're going to be using your industry knowledge and the anecdotal feedback you get within your organization, and hopefully you'll get to talk to lots of end users and confirm those assumptions. But this is where we talk about enterprise standards as an example within the enterprise space, and it could be universities, and we call them enterprise standards, but standards is really the key. You have to start defining boundaries on what you're going to deploy on your tech stack, so to speak, right? You have to start saying 80% of our conference rooms are going to be this. And I don't believe in small, medium, large, for the record. I think that's a terrible way to design systems personally. I believe in designing by use case. So if you have a traditional meeting room, then you're going to build a small version of that all the way up through a extra large version of that, but they are traditional meeting rooms, right? And you should develop your standards to be scalable in that way. So they're riding on the same platforms and technologies, but maybe the displays get bigger and you add extension mics as it gets larger, right? It's something simple. But the point is 80-20 rule with AV systems. You cannot go bespoke just because people think they have the bespoke needs. You have to figure out a way to get 80% of the use case covered. And then you start going, okay, well, we've got 2 or 3 alternative types of rooms or whatever else it might be to start to shape out how you can meet those alternative needs. And I've found, especially within big companies, price will drive it all. It's really that simple. They'll go, I want wireless sharing, and I want wired sharing, and I want 6 displays. Okay, sure. $80,000. And they'll go, what do you have for 12? Every time. So it's okay, right? It's okay that people are going to ask for different things. I'm a pretty firm believer in, yes, you need to match the business case, but when you're working at scale, you have to make generalizations. You're going to have to abstract that use case a little bit, build some personas around the types of uses that you're going to support, and handle them a little more broadly. And for the record, that really helps with the management problem. Because once you've said, I'm going to deploy all of my 80% of rooms on this platform, right, whatever the devices and parts that may be, you've just dramatically consolidated your administration tools, your management technology, and your programming and your software. Everything has gotten a lot simpler because you put boundaries on it. That's why the end users can pull this off, get deep monitoring and deep management, where the integrators can't, because they can't control those same boundaries across all their customers.
Yeah. I want to talk about the tightness of the relationship between integrators, channel partners generally, and these organizations, because you're talking about really consultative relationships. You're talking about understanding on a deep level what these organizations need and helping them even clarify their own needs for them, being that consultative advisor. It almost seems like, in a sense, you're encouraging people to almost enmesh themselves with the client, especially like a Fortune 100 or Fortune 200, an organization that has the resources that there might be hundreds or thousands of conference rooms spread across continents. Do you want to talk about the idea of channel partners, not merely, again, being contractors or installers, not merely having a job, but the virtues of almost enmeshing yourself with the client in a very real way?
Yeah. Well, this is the inevitable transition towards managed services, right? So if we think about the consultative business model, right, where I'm an advisor, a trusted advisor to your organization, that works really well up to a point. It's better than the trunk slamming, hang and banger, right? Like, it's better than that. You like the consultation side where I'm here to help you. I'm your advocate. It's just good sales, right? At the end of the day, is the consultative approach. And I think the integration market generally has got a pretty good handle on this. I mean, I think all the design hours we give away as an industry on opportunities, we've already sort of figured out that, like, generally speaking, like basic design is free. We're here to advise you. We're going to help you kind of get your process down. We'll charge you for it if we do business later. And so that's good. That's a very people-minded business model. I think it's the next step that we're talking about here. And then the next step beyond that is I'm not an outside advisor. I am a part of your organization. I am a service you are consuming. So this is where we start transitioning into managed services. We're going to start taking those same advisory type positions, but instead of having them be an outside contractor who's trying to win some hardware, we're going to move those inside the organization with an @company.com email address embedded into the company. And we're going to say, they're your expert now for either 10 hours a week or 40 hours a week, whatever is right for that arrangement. They're your expert now. And you can communicate with them as if you were communicating with your own internal resources. This has started to evolve out of the maturation of the AV industry and this convergence with IT. That's, I know, a tired statement, but what's changing is the purchase process, right? It's the business model. This is what IT MSP has been doing for a decade. Right? That's what an IT MSP is. They're embedded in the organization and they are taking on a part of the responsibilities for that company as a third party, but embedded, right, on a contract, on a recurring agreement, dealing with the day-to-day operations of that business.
Right.
When you're a big company, you basically have two choices. You build it or you buy it, right? You have to either build a team, need to either build a team or you need to buy a team. It's either, hiring and retention and building a great management structure within it. And AV people are challenging to hire sometimes within an IT space because they don't generally come with all the IT background. So it's a paradigm shift for the employees too. It's very expensive to build a really good AV team. Super worth it if you can do it, but not every organization wants to spend that much time and money building an AV team. So that's where the buy it option comes in, right? And if you find the right partner as an end user organization, you can essentially buy that entire service as a managed service and get them embedded into your organization, and you will go faster. And that's the guarantee, right? When it comes to managed services, the whole value is go faster. it's a very simple outcome, but it's very important to big companies who are feeling lots of pain. And I say this from firsthand experience. When you go into an organization and it's like a 1 or 2 or 3 person AV team, and you've got 2,000-3,000 spaces across many countries, you're in a lot of pain immediately. Former boss of mine, explaining this situation to me before I'd been hired, looked at me and said, "Gentlemen," he's looking at me and my partner, "Rome is burning." That was the way he described the state of the organization. And so it was this intense emotional situation inside of those organizations, right? They needed help. And so the best thing you could possibly do is get the right leader involved to build that, and then either staff it or a subcontractor, contract it with a managed service provider. I will say that it's kind of a new breed of AV service, right? We talked about maturation of the industry. Most are not ready to go to managed services because one of the things you might leave behind is selling hardware. And that's something you might have to be prepared to do in order to remain unbiased on behalf of your customer. Not always, but a lot of times you might have to say, no, we're going to do pure services and we're going to negotiate on behalf of our customer with integrators and with distributors and with manufacturers. So I would say for anybody who really wants to dig into it, like educate yourself on managed services is really the best way to do it, and be prepared because a moment is going to come, a sell the mills moment, if you're familiar with Good to Great, is going to come where you either have to go all in or you have to pull out, because it's not an easy business model and it does not necessarily work super well with hardware-based one-time sales model. So it's where the industry's going, 100%. It's the best way to provide value to a big organization, upstream, not necessarily downstream. We'll talk about that later, but upstream for sure, up market. But it is not for the faint of heart. So I'm excited to see what organizations do. A few have already emerged. They're doing some great work here. At the end of the day, it's about serving the end user organizations and what they need. So I hope we can, answer the call as an industry and provide that deeper value.
Well, Frederick, you said at the outset of the conversation jokingly that the reason you get so much attention is because you're noisy, but I'm going to say the reason you get so much attention is because you elevate the conversation. It's been a fascinating talk. Thank you so much for joining us on AV Plus. I really, really appreciate the time. And as I say, just elevating the conversation for us collectively as an industry.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Dan. Anytime.
Thank you once again so much to Frederick Loucks, who is consultant to manufacturers, integrators, and end user organizations. Really appreciate you being on AV Plus. My name is Dan Ferrisi, Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning into this special edition of AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. Please check back on commercialintegrator.com each and every day for more exciting thought leadership content just like this. Have a great day.